In these stories, when you hear this cuckoo, turn the page. This story is called Wee Willie Watermelon. Wee Willie Watermelon lived in the beautiful Highlands of Scotland. He occupied a little crofter's cottage not far from the lochs, set amongst the sweet-scented heather. As the smoke curled from his little chimney, Wee Willie looked on with pride. The joy of his life was to wander the highlands playing his bagpipes. His music would float over the hills and streams, and the only ones to hear it were the birds, the bees, and the butterflies, or any small animals who happened to be passing by. One bright, sunny morning, as Wee Willie was having his breakfast, a letter plopped through his letterbox onto the doormat. It was from his cousin, Paul Pumpkin, inviting him for a holiday down in the city. Wee Willie was thrilled because he had never been to a city before. The following morning, Wee Willie Watermelon packed a small suitcase and, carrying his precious bagpipes, caught the little number 9 bus, which ran once a day. When he arrived at the city, he could hardly believe his eyes. There were flats, towering churches, shops, factories with long, smoking chimneys, traffic which made constant noise, and hundreds of people. Cousin Paul Pumpkin lived at the top of a tall block of flats. What a view! Willie felt he was back home on the highest mountain, with his head in the clouds. Paul gave Willie tea, because Willie was tired and hungry after his long journey. And then Paul gave him a piano recital. All went well until the following morning. Willie couldn't go one day without playing his bagpipes, and at 6 a.m. the practicing began. The neighbours opened windows to see who, or what, was making such a din. But it wasn't until this had happened for several mornings that they began to complain. Wee Willie Watermelon was sad. He couldn't enjoy life without playing his beloved bagpipes. Paul just couldn't bear to see Willie so sad. Willie looked miserably out of the window with his bagpipes there beside him on the table. So Cousin Paul gathered all the neighbours together in the hope of solving the problem. They came up with the bright idea of writing a letter to the mayor, asking if their friend, Wee Willie Watermelon, could use the bandstand in the city park to practice his pipes when it was not in use for band concerts. They all waited anxiously for a reply from the town hall, and when at last it arrived, giving permission for the bandstand to be used, Wee Willie was overjoyed. The very next morning, as the birds started their dawn chorus, he set off for the city park, singing and skipping as he went. Being able to play in the park bandstand was not the only thing that pleased Willie. Because of all his practicing, Willie had become quite an expert, and this meant that people who wandered into the park stopped to hear him play. Everybody now enjoyed Willie's music. They called and cheered, and he would stay much later at the bandstand than he had ever intended because of the shouts of "More!" and all the clapping. But the best thing, or so Willie thought, was that whether in the city or in his Highland home, he was equally happy. When the music stops, turn the cassette over.
And this story is called Bessie Beetroot. Bessie Beetroot suddenly found herself without a home. She arrived in the garden of the garden gang quite by accident one morning, in a barrow full of compost. As the barrow was tilted, Bessie felt herself falling. She rolled along the ground and hid beneath a rhubarb leaf. Perhaps the gardener won't see me here, she thought to herself. When the barrow was empty, Mr. Rake the gardener went on his way. Then Bessie Beetroot peered slowly round. What a pleasant sight met her eyes! She was standing in the most beautiful garden she had ever seen. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, the bees were humming and butterflies flitted amongst the flowers. The garden gang were busy doing their daily chores. I will surely find a home here, she said. She went to Roger Radish, who was hiding shyly behind a watering can. "Do you know of anywhere I could live?" she asked. Roger jumped into the air at the sound of her voice. He frightened a small bird who was singing on the can handle. Roger quickly made an excuse and dodged behind a plant pot. Betty looked round and saw the pea family practicing gymnastics. They look nice, she thought. I'll ask if they can help. Percival P. said she could have come to his house, but his grandchildren were rather lively and she might find it crowded and noisy. Try the greenhouse, he said. So Betty skipped across the lawn to the greenhouse. Tin Tomato was sitting on a flower pot, busily sketching a feeding caterpillar. He smiled at Betty, who was standing quietly by the door. Tim listened to her story, but then replied that the greenhouse was much too hot for her. Betty set off up the path and met Oliver Onion. He was collecting pebbles to make a rockery. When she asked him about a home, he was so horrified at the idea of anyone else cooking in his precious kitchen that he immediately said she would be better living with Alice Apple, Peter Potato, or maybe Gertrude Gooseberry. First she met Alice Apple. The dizzy heights of the apple tree made her feel giddy. No, she could not live there. Peter Potato was rather gruff, and she felt uneasy as she sat in his parlour. I hope Gertrude Gooseberry can help, she thought sadly. She was now tired and hungry, but Gertrude was no help either. Poor Betty went back to the compost heap and sat on a stone weeping. Whatever shall I do? She cried. Nobody wants me. Suddenly, Polly Pomegranate danced daintily towards her. Polly's lovely face grew sad when she saw Betty. As Betty told her story, Polly's face brightened. She said, "Please come and live with me." Betty smiled through her tears, and hand in hand they set off across the garden to Polly's house. It was neat, tidy, and just right for 2 people. Polly showed Betty her bedroom, and she was delighted. The bed was comfortable, and the little chair by the window gave her a good view of the beautiful garden. Betty gazed happily round Polly's home. "How lucky I am," she said. "I will do all the cleaning and cooking," Betty said, "and you can practice your ballet." That night they ate a delicious meal cooked by Betty. And as they sat in the firelight, Betty felt happy and safe with her newfound friend. In her new home.